Hello everybody and welcome along to this video, which is Mr. Johnson teaches how to answer the Inspector Calls exam question. So part of a series of videos that you'll find in this playlist supporting you with different elements of an Inspector Calls. This one I'm focusing particularly on something students ask me a lot about, which is how to actually respond to a question and what to do. So during this video I'm going to give you some tips, some ideas that hopefully will work for you. As it says at the bottom there, you'll need to be ready to pause this video and have some pen and paper so you can actively revise. Don't just watch this video and expect it all just to sink in instantly. I promise you, in 3 days' time, you won't remember the details. So be ready to pause, rewatch and write down some things. And then at the end of this, the next really important step is actually having a go at an exam question. You can't just listen about how to do it. You've actually got to put yourself through that. So bear all of those tips in mind. And here we go. So just wanted to remind you about the paper, in fact, if you'll let me click on. Here we go. This paper is is paper 2, so literature paper 2, and it's broken down into 3 sections. And those 3 sections are those. So section A, section B, section C. So section B is the poetry, as you can see. C is the unseen poetry. 45 minutes on each of these. And then we're going to focus on this, which is the modern prose or drama is how they refer to it. Now, Inspector Calls is a drama text. It is a production that's performed on a stage. You are reading the script. Try and remember those things as well. Now, what do the questions look like in case you haven't remembered this or seen it for a long time? This is the sort of thing that you will see appear on the exam paper. These are some examples that I've created following the same model as AQA. So you'll get given a choice of questions. That's the first thing I want to point out to you, that you've got either question 1 or question 2. Don't do both, okay? The worst thing you can do is have the 45 minutes, which isn't really that long, and try and do 2 questions in 45 minutes. You are allowed to choose the question that you like the look of most. Look at it, they're both worth the same amount of marks. You can see that in brackets on the right hand side there. So therefore you can choose the one that you like the look of most. Now, what are things I want to point out to you? Well, firstly, that you've got 45 minutes to have a go at earning these 30 marks. The 30 marks, as it says, is the main chunk of what you're earning there. But also wanted to point out that there are 4 marks given over on this question to your accuracy. So 4 marks doesn't seem like much. It's not the most important thing. And yet, it only takes 1 mark difference to get from a grade 4 to a grade 5 or a grade 7 to a grade 8 and so forth. So missing capital letters, forgetting full stops, and the basics of paragraphing and so forth really do matter here. So just be aware, if you're the sort of person who often will forget those things, to not forget it, particularly on this question. Right, so what is the question really asking you then? So I've just picked one of those 2 questions as an example today, although if I just double back, the other thing I want to point out in fact as well is generally the questions seem to be split down into 2 broad areas. So generally speaking, year on year, you'll often get questions which are about a character, like the bottom one, number 2 there, how does Priestley present Eric? Or, as the top one says there, how does Priestley present responsibility, which is a theme question. So again, I can't guarantee 100%, but generally speaking, theme questions and character questions are the most common ones that you often get. So again, a question then, what is it really asking you? Well, let's have a look at this question then. How does Priestley present Eric as a character who changes and learns lessons about himself? So, with the first thing then, the key word I always get my classes to look at is how. How does Priestley present Eric? So, okay, what methods is Priestley using to present Eric? What sort of devices are being used? Is there any repetition? Is there, like Mr. Burling uses, dramatic irony? Are there imperatives? Those sorts of things. Also, when it says how does Priestley, characters are how he presents him. So you could talk about how he's very different from his father. Priestley uses the contrast between Mr. Burling and Eric Burling. That's a method, the characters being very different. The structure is a method that too many people forget. So actually, how does he begin and how does he then develop as a character? That's how Eric is presented as well. So those are just some of the things that you could look at. And also, I've underlined there, essentially we're talking about the ways that he presents him. Next thing, this question is about Eric, yes, but really it's asking how does Priestley present Eric? Too many students will write about Eric does this and Eric does that and Eric does this, when actually Priestley crafts Eric so that he does this. Priestley then makes Eric do that. Focus on the writer. As I've put there, he is the one who's constructed everything that you're looking at. So remember that it's been put together in a certain way, as has Eric. He has been put together in a certain way by Priestley. Now, the other thing I've got here is what I would call the steer of the question. So essentially, what are you being made to look at? So those first two red circles are important, but the blue bit is asking you to have a particular look at Eric as a character who changes, idea maybe number 1, and learns lessons about himself, idea number 2. So those are two things you could start to unpick. Now, on my next slide, I've got some thoughts and some ideas for you that you could maybe look at. So again, same idea, Priestley presenting Eric then as a character who changes. Well, on the left-hand side, this is how I would go about planning. So I would firstly break it down into any quotes that I can remember about Eric and jot any ones down quickly in the first 5 minutes that you have. Spend 5 minutes planning. I promise you, you will gain more marks than the person who doesn't because you're thought through what you're going to say. I've got half shy, half assertive. That's a stage direction. Early on, he's described as squiffy. I also know he describes himself as squiffy later on, so that's a bit of a theme occurring. We try for the highest possible prices, he says to his dad. So it essentially is an argument of why shouldn't they be able to try and ask for more wages. He's talking about Eva Smith at the beginning. And at the end, he says something along the lines of, he was our police inspector, all right. I wouldn't actually need any more than that, really. That's probably enough evidence. Evidence can also be things you remember that he does, but better if you can try and remember some quotes. But again, you don't need to remember all of them. Like that last bullet point on the left-hand side, if you couldn't remember all those words, but you remembered he roughly said that, you could just say, and Eric talks about how the inspector was their, quote, police inspector, and actually then talk about the significance of that. So you don't need to remember huge numbers of words, but any words you want to analyse ideally need to be quoted. Middle there then, what can I say overall about Eric then? So if I was thinking about him, I could say, what does he start like, how does he develop, and what does he end like? So at the beginning he starts the play as irresponsible, drinking too much. Then I've got those middle bullet points, he mistreats her, he gets her pregnant, but he does show remorse as well. I think that's really important about Eric. He doesn't show himself in a brilliant light all the way through, but you know what? He at least changes, and actually, as I put at the end there, distances himself from his parents' views. Now, messages are super important. You'll know that if I teach you. You'll know that if you looked at this channel before. And absolutely, the question at the top there, yes, it's asking you about Eric, but what's it really asking you about? Well, it's really asking you about what is Priestley trying to show us through the character of Eric. And I've jotted down some messages that I think, as you can see there, could be linked to Eric. And I would be trying to drop those messages in through my answer. If you're not sure about what I'm talking about messages, there is another video on this playlist which talks about Priestley's ideas and messages. Watch that one, and then hopefully that will give you a better understanding. The next question I often get from students is, okay, so that's my plan, but how do I structure my paragraphs? What am I going to do? Well, this is something I would suggest as a rough structure. Be ready to adapt this. It may not work perfectly for you, or you might run out of time or anything like that, so just be ready to be adaptable. So number 1 then, I would certainly talk about an introduction where you put forward your concept, like what is the main message you can link to this question? For example, Eric really represents the idea of change and hope for the future because of the journey he goes through. That is the sort of thing I'd put in my first opening. I'm almost looking at the big picture. Eric as a whole, what is he about? And then my next paragraphs would be going into some more detail. For example, I would then go into the, as it says there, my response I'd aim to do in chronological order. So I'd start writing about Eric at the start of the play, then maybe towards the middle. Some of my students panic and think, well, I can't think of anything from the middle. By middle, I mean just not the very beginning. So, for example, Eric, when he's confronting his father and says about why shouldn't they try for the highest possible wages, that's still quite near the beginning, but I'd still write that in my second paragraph, because the drunk, squiffy guy at the beginning is very different already to the one who starts standing up against his father at that point. As I've said there, they try and link to Priestley's messages, and you're aiming for 2 to 3 paragraphs, it says on that last line. Aiming for, because each student is different, your timing may go brilliantly, it may not, but aiming to try and at least, as a bare minimum, talk about the character, how they start and how they end. And if you can do something about how they develop across the middle, and by middle, remember, I mean any part which isn't the beginning or end, that is fine. And then, have I got it? Yes, a conclusion there as well. So what is a conclusion? Essentially, the different ideas that you've covered, you're almost writing a bit of a summary to some extent of bringing all your main ideas, into one paragraph. So almost for the person reading it, you're summing up. You're saying, so overall we can see how Eric is a character who has developed across the play. He was like this at the beginning, but by the end he was this, and Priestley was using him in order to demonstrate this. To some extent you may end up repeating a little bit of what you've said. Try not to directly copy word for word what you've said, but you are essentially summarising up for it. So what key reminders can I give you then? Well, as it says there, remember the questions are always about Priestley. Doesn't matter what else the steer of the question is. You need to write about Priestley doing this and Priestley showing us that. If you are doing that, you stand a much better chance of gaining those highest marks. Try to look at how a character or theme develops from the start towards the end and why that might be important, that somebody does change or somebody doesn't change in the case of the older Burlings. Don't use time retelling the story. I put that there because I've been marking Inspector Call's work recently, and you're not gaining marks for retelling the story. At times, you need to mention what's going on before you put a quote to contextualise it, but essentially, don't spend huge amounts of time retelling the story. It may feel like you're gaining marks, but you're not. Finally, as I've put there, really important, try to keep linking back to Priestley's messages. If you are doing that, then again, you are giving yourself the best chance of success. And that's where I'm going to draw this video to a close. A reminder that there is a video about Priestley's messages for you to check out if you're really not certain of that, so do watch that video. Above all, practice, practice, practice. You are never going to succeed in an exam question if you never practice writing the exam question. Responding against the clock, so timing yourself is really important, and I promise the more you practice those sorts of things, the more confident you will become and the better you will become too. So I think that's a good place to end this video, just by reminding you that there are obviously other videos you can check out across the channel. Feel free to subscribe if you think that these videos have been useful for you, recommend it to a friend, all of those sorts of things. You know what you're doing. And above all, when it comes to your exams, the very best of luck to you, and goodbye for now.